Police in Mukono district are still investigating a suspected case of suicide by hanging after a senior 3 student was found dead hanging in a dormitory at Seta High School. It is alleged that 16-year-old Elshama Sesazi attended evening classes the previous day and returned to the dormitory to sleep along with classmates, only to later find his lifeless body hanging on a mosquito net just next to his bed. While investigations are still ongoing to establish the exact cause of the teenager's death, the development comes just days after another incident of a senior 3 female student at Impoma Girls' School, Kamelian Merendagile, who set herself on fire protesting her parents' decision to bring her back to the same school. Can these 2 incidents be treated as isolated cases, or there is a trend of rising cases of teenage suicide in schools? And what could be the problem? This is The Limelight. Welcome to the program this evening. My name is Prince Apollo, and on The Limelight we look at the case of increasing cases of teenage suicide. And my guest this evening is Mr. Ali Male. And Male is a qualified counseling psychologist with over 18 years in providing psychosocial support, counseling, training, and mental health care services. He is currently in private practice working as the Chief Executive Officer at A to Z Professional Counseling and Support Center located in Kitende, Kajansi Town Council. Mr. Male, let's go straight to the topic. And I want to hear from your experience. Can we treat these 2 cases from Mukono as isolated cases, or what could be the actual picture out there?
Presenter, and also thank you for hosting me to this program, a very important program, Limelight, as we address a very important, a very serious, sensitive issue. As introduced, my name is Ali Male. I'm a counseling psychologist with over 18 years of certified practice in the psychosocial world. Now, the question you have asked me, whether these cases that have come out through the media, whether they are the isolated cases or they are the true figure. The truth is that suicide is a very serious public health problem that many people do not give attention because they do not understand exactly how this thing trends up to the end when someone completes a suicide. The cases that come out through the cameras, through the media, they are just a tip of an iceberg of exactly what happens. As I've told you that in my 18 years of professional practice in this profession, as we talk to teenagers, I can just give you my statistics that between, if you receive 10 cases, like for example, 10 cases of teenagers, you will realize that 6 of them or 5 of them mention the word suicide. But because the public do not mind about assessing, they are not maybe trained to assess self-harm, to assess suicide, to evaluate what is really going to happen, where is the problem. Many people go unnoticed and eventually they complete this suicide thing, especially with the teenagers. One of the questions we use to ask them, we always ask them, especially if you have sensed that there are severe psychosocial issues like depression, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and others. The moment you detect them, one of the preliminary questions we ask, have you ever thought about ending life? They will tell you, yes, I have thought about it several times. Probably some have attempted, but they have not completed the suicide. Others attempt, maybe others do not, are still contemplating the definite ways how they can complete it. And eventually others are saved through the prayers, God's intervention, and so on. But when you see the assessment, you realize that the teenagers are at a very high risk of completing a suicide act, which is a very serious issue. Therefore, these are not isolated cases. Many children are between the age of 10 or 11 or 12 up to around 25 at a very high risk of completing or committing suicide, because they are always pushed to the edge with certain factors, as we shall discuss them in our next segment. So the issue is that there are many teenagers who are at a high risk, but because there is no expertise to assess, definitely nobody will come to the rescue of something serious to this magnitude. Then others have had issues. They have tried to communicate, but nobody is giving attention. Others have just been neglected. So the problem is big, yes.
Okay. Mr. Male, how can one tell that a teenager is sliding into depression?
Thank you very much for that question. There are many causes, or there are many triggers, we call them triggers, that push most of these teenagers to the edge of completing a suicide act. We classify them as psychosocial, as community, as a family, as religious, and probably economical. But I will start from my side of expertise, the psychosocial issues that have triggered these instances. The World Health Organization classifies them accordingly, but brings out family dysfunctionness as one of the main issues that trigger or that are pushing most of these teenagers to the edge. What do we mean by family dysfunctionness? Family dysfunctionality is characterized by different things, including exchange between parents, characterized by quarrels, drinking alcohol, fights, separation, divorce. All these have put many teenagers at a very high risk. So when the family is not working well, all the boundaries, all the entities that make a functional families, when they are killed and they are not healthy, definitely the child or the teenager is at a very high risk. This brings about, it brings out a point that there is lack of proper parenting skills amongst these teenagers. It's a big problem that most parents do not know exactly how to attend to their emotional, psychological needs. And definitely when you ignore them, for them, they do describe themselves as vulnerable. They will think that they are not loved, they don't belong to that family. You discriminate them, maybe because of the way you communicate to them as a parent and so on. The other issues in the line of psychosocial include the depression issues, and then acute anger, acute anxieties, and unresolved psychological distress. All these put the teenagers at a very high risk. Then we come to the emotional area, which describes their moods, because as you know that teenagers normally at a very drastic stage of development, and they have not yet developed the abstract reasoning to digest through what is logical and what is not logical enough. Therefore, they always think about this as the last resort. And yet, you would have put an active listening ear and probably you would have had them. Some of the signs and symptoms which can communicate to you, the parent, that you are at risk, your child is at a very high risk, include most of them rotate around behavior, emotional, and psychological cues. Emotionally, you will see this child behaving in, bringing out all the tempers, the emotions very high, acute anger, having unusual anger that is not called for, and in most cases, which leads to an explosion. And when you don't mind about resolving that conflict, you are at a very high risk. Another crew which can communicate to you, they normally say words as if they are saying goodbye to the world, but they say them in a vague way that you may not be able to understand. For example, they might say, I may not be around. Death is better than me. I don't deserve to be around. So once they bring these communications, please pay attention very quickly and come to their rescue. Others may now ram into drinking alcohol and then also doing what we call self-harm. In fact, some of them do self-harm, something which they get from this information on internet, which is full of communications in different arenas. So they get this information and then they use it and then they do self-harm. They keep cutting. Most of the teenagers you talk to, some of them, they will tell you, I have had self-harm for some time, but my parent doesn't know. So they cut around their hands, around their thighs. They are communicating that they are struggling, but you are not paying attention. And they are this close to committing suicide. The other issue rotates around on not paying attention to their needs, not listening to them. The moment they feel they are not listened to, and then they may keep quiet, get isolated, and they forget about you, and then you don't pay attention. When you look at the previous cases, you look at previous cases that have come through the media, they have always left cheats, which state something like, you didn't give me time, I'm sorry, I had to go, you pay for this. In other words, suicide, when someone wants to commit suicide, they are craving for love, they are craving for attention, which you are not giving. So, those are some
Mr.
of
Male,
the pros and the cons
Mr. Male,
communicate the teenager is having a problem, pushing them to the edge.
Mr. Male, just because of time, if you can tell us, in like the case of SETA, high school and Impoma girls, in a school environment, what can school administrators do to avoid such incidents of teenage suicide? And I am asking, if you can hear me, Mr. Male, what can school administrators do to avoid or to reduce these such incidents? Okay. I was asking Mr. Male if at all he can tell us what school administrators can do to avoid or reduce these incidents of suicide in teenagers, and relating to these two cases which occurred in a school environment. And if you can hear me, please can you respond to that? Okay. I understand we cannot communicate, but it is being worked upon. But we need to also hear from the recommendations from Mr. Male to either government. What can government do to intervene and possibly mitigate the situation relating to these cases of teenage suicide? But of course, we would want, of course, to know in a school environment or even in communities. What can people do? What can leaders do? What can parents do to avoid such incidents? And Male Ali is a qualified counseling psychologist with over 18 years providing social support, counseling, training, and mental health care services. He's currently in private practice working as the Chief Executive Officer at A to Z Professional Counseling and Support Center located in Chitende Kajansi Town Council. And we were reflecting on the two incidents which happened in Mukono district, where 16-year-old teenager at Seta High School hung himself using a mosquito net in the school dormitory, an act of suicide. But this happened just after days. Another incident happened at Mpoma Girls School, where another teenager also set herself on fire just because the parents were not listening to her. Indeed, we can now understand that the issues, driving these cases of suicide are much more related on the communication between the parents and the teachers and the kids, but also how these kids are relating with the people around them. Well, now we know what the problem is. I'm told he is he can respond. Okay. I'm told we may not get him again, but he told us issues like when you see the mood is shifting in a kid, he's now angry, and it's not his behavior or her behavior. Once you find out that they start making statements that sound hopeless, they don't even think about the future, then you know there is a problem. When they start drinking alcohol, that's a signal that something is wrong with them. And when you see them start doing self-harm, they start cutting themselves, you know that there is a problem, and that can easily slide them into depression and finally suicide. My name is Prince Apollo. Thank you so much for being part of the discussion. Well, thanks to Mr. Male, a counseling psychologist. Thank you so much for your time. But we can do something as parents, we can do something as communities, we can do something as leaders. Let's catch up again next Friday in another edition of The Limelight. Let's hope we all remain safe. Good evening, and God bless you. God bless Uganda.